if you've been to cities but you've had enough? Have you been to Paris, France?
And if you doubt that Paris was made for love, give Paris one more chance.
I'm being a bit unfair calling Paris a shithole. It's more of a piss hole, literally a piss hole. The city's public peeing problem has become so chronic the government has installed open-air urinals.
A bright red urinal has been installed, overlooking passing tourist boats.
It's a desirable and historic neighborhood. Seeing people urinating in front of your door is not the nicest thing.
One official said, if we don't do anything, then men are just going to pee in the streets.
It's such a problem in the city that doorways are eaten away by the acid.
They even have units of the police force dedicated to hunting down unlawful peeing. But while many assert that Paris stinks of piss, journalist Andrew Malone wrote, on a steamy summer's night, the sounds and smells are of Africa. As a white European, I attract odd looks. Where was he visiting? Nigeria? Eritrea? Sudan? No, it was Paris. Specifically the Saint-Denis area, which is home to, wait for it, 300,000 illegal immigrants. One area of Paris alone, just 6 miles from the Eiffel Tower, 300,000 illegal immigrants. Gotta love that cultural enrichment. Out of Saint-Denis' 1.5 million population, 600,000 are Muslims from North Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa, and there are at least 160 mosques. That's almost as many as the number of times that Air France employees go on strike every year. But 160 just isn't enough. There's not enough space. So worshippers are spilling out onto the streets with loudspeakers blasting out the Islamic call to prayer, sometimes past 1 a.m. in the morning. Malone writes, the area is already lost to France. With open drug dealing, Sharia courts, women wearing the full burqa despite it being banned, and police afraid to patrol the streets.
I have a friend. He's a very, very substantial guy. He loves the City of Lights. He loves Paris. I hadn't seen him in a while. And I said, Jim, let me ask you a question. How's Paris doing? Paris? I don't go there anymore. Paris is no longer Paris.
Paris also claims the distinction of being the world's largest open-air migrant camp. Mattresses and trash are strewn everywhere. First it was just the outer suburbs, now it's expanding into the tourist hotspots. Faced with the choice of doing nothing or dealing with riots threatened by their occupants if the camps are removed, authorities choose the former. Because when they warn you they're going to riot, they normally follow up on that promise. Now Communist Party councillors are demanding that public parks in Paris be turned over to become migrant camps. Paris's second and third generation immigrants aren't faring too well either. Ghettoised in hopeless, brutalist tower blocks on the edge of the city. Running battles with police are commonplace. But let's not just blame the migrants. Paris's great unwashed far-left mobs also like to riot and burn down their own city at the drop of a hat. And winning the World Cup was just another excuse for a rampage. Paris's new residents don't appear to be very patriotic. When a French couple in Paris shouted "Vive la France" when the country won the World Cup, a gang of Algerian men beat them up. When helicopters flew overhead in training for the Bastille Day celebrations earlier this month, writes Andrew Malone, one man pretended to shoot at them with a machine gun. Another pushed him away and pretended to fire a shoulder-mounted missile, tracing the missile with his hand towards its target and shouting, "Boom!" Everyone laughed. Further down the street, a woman was surrounded as she opened a huge bag full of phones, shoes, sunglasses and handbags, clearly stolen from tourists or Parisians. Sub-Saharans in Paris also provide another excellent service to tourists. They walk up to you, throw a crappy, worthless bracelet on your shoulder, then along with about 4 of their very insistent mates, demand you pay for it. Now any normal person would call this a mugging. But here's the thing, if you refuse to pay the 10 to 20 euros for the crappy crappy, worthless bracelet, they'll call you a racist. So it's not mugging, it's just rightful redistribution of wealth. And if you still refuse to pay up, they'll threaten to kick the crap out of you. And the police are nowhere to be seen because presumably they're too busy on piss patrol or hunting down someone for wolf whistling at a woman, because it's now illegal in France to wolf whistle at a woman. Now call me pedantic, but I reckon that instead of prosecuting wolf whistlers, maybe we should be more concerned about the fact that just 2% of rape cases in Paris result in conviction. You know, priorities. And that within the first 5 months of 2018, reports of adult rapes went up by 20% across all 20 of Paris's boroughs. Now Moroccan police officers are being drafted in to patrol the Goutte d'Or neighbourhood of Paris, where crime has exploded. Many women now refuse to go out. They complain of being harassed, forced to modify their clothing, and being refused entry to cafes.
In some of the outskirts of Paris, men have taken over public spaces. They visit a local cafe with a hidden camera. Before they even get inside, their presence seems to disturb the other clients.
Dans ce café, il n'y a pas de mixité.
Est-ce que c'est normal?
On est à Sevran, on n'est pas à Paris.
Même à Sevran, c'est la France.
T'es dans le 93.
Et alors, le 80... Et alors...
À Paris, c'est des mentalités différentes. C'est comme anglais.
Back in 2015, the mayor of Paris threatened to sue Fox News for saying there were de facto no-go zones in Paris. There was a pundit, a security expert called Steve Emerson. He went on Fox News and said that a lot of this jihadist, radicalized sympathy was emerging out of the immigrant communities in Paris, the quote, no-go Muslim areas, the ghettos. He was roundly ridiculed, called Islamophobic, and even the mayor of Paris went to the lengths of suing Fox News simply because he made these comments. Now what do we see transpire in the aftermath of the Paris massacre just a few days ago? Massive raids across both France and Belgium targeting these no-go Muslim ghettos, which for a year the media has pretended do not exist, and if you say they exist, you're racist, you're bigoted, you're Islamophobic. Now such no-go zones have grown to such an extent that there's an app which warns people if they're in a no-go zone, as well as providing live alerts of sexual assaults. Whereas Paris was once known as the City of Love, it's now known as the City of God-awful graffiti.
But Paul, buildings and walls are just the urban canvas for artists to exhibit their skills.
Right, because this 100-year-old wooden door has been vastly improved by this later addition, hasn't it? These two photos taken 3 years apart illustrate the fantastic contribution these artists have made to Parisian aesthetics. As journalist Anthony Peregrine writes, if this street stuff is art, then my burp is a concerto. In addition to graffiti, Paris is carpeted with used cigarette butts. The situation worsened to the point where the government had to hire nearly 2,000 anti-incivility agents to patrol the streets dishing out fines.
Parisiens sont sales, font aucun effort. J'ai pas mal vu d'autres pays, d'autres villes. Franchement, on est vraiment dégueulasse, quoi.
And because the place is littered by trash, Paris is infested with rats. Lots of rats. 6 million rats.
It was pretty disturbing. People were eating and napping with rats running around right next to them.
While graffiti artists continue to vandalise Paris with their inane, meaningless doorbins, the government has done its best to ruin the surroundings too, by erecting a huge 10-foot glass wall around the Eiffel Tower at a cost of 35 million euros to protect against terrorist attacks. But wait, I thought walls were racist.
I wouldn't go to France. I wouldn't go to France. Because France is no longer France. France is no longer France.
Gotta love that cultural enrichment. At last count, Paris was losing 1.5 million tourists a year, with 21.5% fewer Chinese tourists and a whopping 41.2% fewer Japanese tourists. And while these numbers may have recovered a bit, the fact that the city has suffered 10 separate terror attacks since 2015 isn't helping. Jews are fleeing Paris in droves, with up to 7,000 leaving every single year. Mainly because 40% of all violent hate crimes in France are anti-Semitic, yet Jews represent just 1% of the population. Synagogues are being firebombed, violent attacks are becoming commonplace, street harassment is increasing. According to the president of the Jewish Agency for Israel, there's no future for Jews in France. 550 new migrants arrive in Paris every single week, providing the kind of cultural enrichment that seems to have triggered a lot of racists on the TripAdvisor forums. Please do not trust the images you see online, as you will not be getting a panorama, as everywhere you look will either be rubbish left by migrant families that have settled at the hotel's corner or construction sites. Paris needs to do something to close their borders or provide for the overwhelming number of homeless migrants crowding and soiling the Parisian sidewalks. Enjoy the hotel because it's worth every penny, but beware of the social impact of stepping over homeless and their feces on the sidewalks on your way out to explore the city. It looks more like a bazaar for illegal migrants. We were accosted by a migrant who tried to intimidate me and spat at us when that didn't work. We noticed many groups of only male migrants hanging around in the streets. When we got to Paris, I had a culture shock. There are piles of human poops everywhere on the streets, including outside the Louvre Museum. Subway is way dirtier and public toilets are non-existent to gross. But hey, at least Paris has retained its identity, forged after the Second World War as the intellectual capital of the world, where writers could freely express themselves without fear of recrimination, founded on the legacy of Voltaire's powerful denunciation of religious intolerance. Like when Michel Houellebecq published his 2015 book Submission, which warned about an Islamist takeover of France. A few hours before, a bunch of Islamists massacred Charlie Hebdo cartoonists, which led to armed guards being placed out of Houellebecq's publishers, with Houellebecq himself being under the constant threat of assassination. But for a brief moment, we all cried in unison. Je suis Charlie. The freedom to offend is a fundamental part of freedom of speech, which soon turned into, oh, they probably deserved it for drawing all those horrible cartoons. Now French intellectualism is dead. Charlie Hebdo announced it would no longer draw the Prophet Muhammad, and one of its top journalists quit the magazine, saying it had gone soft on Islamist extremism. While another French intellectual, Eric Zemmour, was fined for inciting hatred against Muslims after he called the migrant crisis an invasion. But don't worry, because President Macron says that mass migration is France's destiny. I mean, it's working out great for Paris already, isn't it? So why not invite in millions more? I visited Paris several times, in 2006, in 2015, and again in 2016, and every single time it got significantly worse. Paris is ruined. Paris is a dump. Paris is a shithole. Pathological altruism, progressive myopia, and cultural capitulation have made it that way. Hopefully, somehow, it can recover, because it's an iconic city. But until that happens, I'm never going back.
Paris is no longer Paris.